Hi guys, this is Mrs. Foy, and this is a lecture on the digestive system. If you are in my class, my Anatomy and Physiology class, then you will have access to this presentation. If you are not and you would like access to it, please contact me and I will be happy to share it with you. So guys, the digestive system is actually one big tube. So it starts at the oral cavity and it goes through the pharynx. The common name for the pharynx, sorry, I can't talk. The common name for the pharynx is the throat, and it is a common air and food tube. And then after the pharynx, then food would go into the esophagus, and then that tube enlarges into the stomach. And then the food goes into the small intestine. The small intestine loops around. There's lots of different names for it. And then that tube goes into the large intestine. And the large intestine goes up and across and down. And then the food that is not absorbed is going to be released out the anus. So as you can see, the digestive system, or gastrointestinal tract, or sometimes called alimentary canal, is all one big tube. There are accessory organs that are in the abdominal cavity but aren't part of the tube. They are accessory because they are not part of the alimentary canal. And those are the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. So those are three accessory organs that are kind of attached to the tube, but they are not part of the gastrointestinal tract themselves. And we'll talk about what those do in just a minute. So the GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract, includes these basic different structures. So as we've said, we have the oral cavity, that is the tongue and the teeth and the salivary glands there. And we start with some mechanical processing of food, mashing and shearing with our teeth and our tongue, and some mixing with the saliva there, and actually a little bit of chemical digestion occurs. Here we're talking about our salivary glands over here, under the tongue and back on the roof of the mouth, that actually release a lot of lubricating fluid. We swallow about a quart of that a day. And there are some enzymes in there, an enzyme called amylase that we'll talk about later that breaks down carbohydrates. The pharynx, as we've talked about before, is a shared common tube where air and water go down. And then there's a little structure right here that we're going to talk about that separates the air from the food. And then it goes down the esophagus, so that's the tube that goes to the water. That's the tube that goes to the stomach. And then the stomach here, this is where we're going to have a little bit of mechanical digestion. The stomach actually contracts and mashes the food up a little bit, mostly chemical digestion with some acids and some enzymes. And then the food is going to go into the small intestine, where it is going to absorb nutrients and vitamins and ions and a little bit of water. The liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas are accessory organs. The liver has a bunch of different functions that we'll talk about, but one of the things that it does is it actually secretes bile, and bile is something that helps us digest fat. The gallbladder is a storage it's a little balloon-like structure underneath the bladder that actually stores bile. And we can live, sometimes we have some problems with the gallbladder. We'll talk about that later, and you can actually live without a gallbladder, as many people do. And then the pancreas, this organ that kind of nestled underneath the stomach, it has two functions, as we'll learn about later. And then we have the large intestine, and the large intestine's function is to absorb a bunch of water so that the waste material that's going out is not so watery. We do have some vitamin production in there, but this is our large intestine, and then it goes out the anus. So there are 6 different actions of the digestive system, so I'm going to go through those with you right now. The first is the ingestion of food. That just means when food is brought in to the mouth. Then we have mechanical processing of that food, so crushing, shearing, and this mostly occurs in our mouth with our tongue and our teeth and our very strong chewing muscles that help to break that food down. Digestion itself is the chemical breakdown of food. So we use some enzymes and some acids to actually break down the food chemically. We also secrete. So there are things in the digestive system that get secreted into the tube, like watery acids and buffers and enzymes and salt that are created by the epithelial tissue of the GI tract and some glands that are there into the tube itself. And then we have absorption. So where secretion is materials going into the tube, absorption is going into the blood vessels that go throughout the body. So these would be our amino acids, our organic molecules, electrolytes, vitamins, and water that get absorbed back into the bloodstream and get transported through the body. And then what's left over, the undigested food that's been dehydrated in the large intestine, is eliminated, and that goes out the body. So I'd like you to pause the video here. If you're my students, I'd like you to answer these on a piece of paper, these questions, and you can just pause the video, go back if you need to, and you should be able to answer these 3 thought questions. So let's go into a little bit more into depth on the functions of the oral cavity. So the first thing that happens in the oral cavity is we have sensory analysis. Think about that. We want to smell and we want to taste what we're going to swallow. If it tastes bad, or smells bad, we're going to spit it out. And that's a good evolutionary thing that we have evolved over the years to protect ourselves from poisoning. We have mechanical processing, as we talked about before. We have lubrication of our food in the oral cavity with mucus and salivary gland secretions. And we have some limited digestion. So we talked about this enzyme amylase that is going to start to break down some starches. This is a good picture of something called the uvula. The uvula is that little boxing bag thing at the back of your throat that you can see. And this actually, when you swallow, folds up and over so that material will not go up into your nasopharynx. So for my students, you do not need to know all these different terms. We don't need to know these. The hard and soft palate we did see in our dissection of the pig, so you should be aware of the hard and soft palate and the uvula. So guys, swallowing itself is a reflex, and it is controlled by our brainstem. And what it does is it's actually a series of events that have to occur in a specific order in order for food to go down the right tube and us not to choke. So it starts out with some nerves that are going to tell the tongue to move in a certain direction, and the pharynx, the trachea here. This is in the front, and this is just going to be for air. So obviously we don't want food to go in there. So what happens is that as the tongue and the muscles are coordinated by the brainstem to swallow, the little uvula goes back up and prevents food from going back up into the nasal cavity. That would not be good. We don't want that to happen. And the bolus, this is what we call this lump of chewed up, mushy food, goes down, and there is a structure called the epiglottis that actually flaps down over the top of the larynx. This is the larynx. We don't want food to go down there. And so that epiglottis is going to shut off the top of the trachea. If this reflex does not work correctly, then food can get into our windpipe, into our trachea, and that causes choking and coughing, and that's not a good thing. This is a great video. that I put the URL here for you. I'd like you to go here and watch this video. It's just about 2 minutes, but it really shows a wonderful animation of the swallowing process. So the swallowing continues in the esophagus. So the esophagus is this muscular tube, and it's behind the trachea. It is lined by muscles, and these muscles are going to work together in a movement called peristalsis to move the bolus down towards the stomach. The esophagus is about 25 centimeters long in a human, and it has longitudinal and circular muscles that work together in a rhythmic fashion to get the food down. So we just talked about this, right? So this is controlled by smooth muscle. Remember that this is not under voluntary control, so this would be an example of involuntary muscle, involuntary control. We do not have control of it. It's part of our autonomic nervous system. And this wave of rhythmic contractions of these smooth muscles is called peristalsis. It moves the bolus along the length of the esophagus, and it's going to trigger a wave of contraction through the entire muscular sheet to get the food down to the stomach. So here shows a little bit better picture of the longitudinal muscle and the circular muscle. So here's the, here's the longitudinal muscle right here, and then the circular muscle would actually go around like this. You're seeing a cross section of it. And so this is just a nice little diagram that shows you the contraction of the smooth muscle, the longitudinal muscle, and the circular muscle, and it propels the bolus down the esophagus. Reverse peristalsis, that's what happens when you throw up. And your stomach is going to contract, and the wave goes in the opposite direction to get materials up and out of your stomach. So now here is our esophagus. Here we go now into the actual stomach. This is the diaphragm. So this is the beginning of the abdominal cavity. So here's the diaphragm that separates the thoracic cavity. This is the thoracic cavity up here, and the abdominal cavity down here. And right about where the esophagus goes into the stomach, there is a sphincter, which is kind of like a muscular valve. It's called the esophageal sphincter, or also it's called the cardiac sphincter, And this is a muscular valve that prevents backflow of the acid material that is in the stomach from going back up into the esophagus. If that happens, we have heartburn, and that's why I always call this the cardiac sphincter, because it helps remember that that's what heartburn is. So if you cut open your stomach, you would see a bunch of folds. Those are called rugae, and the stomach itself is surrounded by smooth muscle, and it can actually contract. And when you hear your stomach rumbling, those are contractions of the stomach, and makes a lot of noise if there's not a lot of stuff in there. And those rugae are going to help to kind of smash up the food a little bit. On the opposite end of the stomach, there is another sphincter called the pyloric sphincter, and that is going to allow the control of food going into the small intestines, little bits at a time, so that we can start the digestive process in the small intestine. So the main functions of the stomach are the storage of undigested food, a little bit of a mechanical, that means physically breaking down the digested food, the rugae, the stomach muscles itself start to contract, and then we actually start to have chemical digestion by acids. The major acids is hydrochloric acid, and some enzymes that are secreted into the stomach to help to break the food down, the chemical bonds, so that we can absorb those nutrients. So digestion in the stomach is performed by some very important enzymes. One of these is an enzyme called pepsin, and pepsin's job is to break down proteins. We also talked about the salivary glands releasing another enzyme called amylase that starts to break down carbohydrates. And then we have enzymes that break down fat called lipases. Remember, the fancy name for fats are lipids. So we have pepsin that starts to break down proteins, we have amylase that's already starting to break down carbohydrates, and we have lipases that start to break down fats. We also use acids like hydrochloric acids to begin to chemically break down these molecules. And the stomach is very, very acidic, about a pH of 2. And so that is what is happening in the stomach. So I'd like you to pause the video here and see if you can answer these 3 questions on a sheet of paper, and pause the video and make sure that you understand before you go any further. So it's very interesting what causes heartburn. There's a couple of different things that can happen. The first thing that can happen is this esophageal or cardiac sphincter can have a malformation in it, and it can actually allow the acidic material in the stomach to splash up into the esophagus. And because the esophagus does not have the mucus and the other protective coating that the stomach has, those acids very quickly start to break down the tissue in the esophagus, and they can cause ulcers. And those ulcers are painful, and they can cause bleeding. You can also have ulcers in your stomach and in your small intestine for various reasons. We just found out not too many years ago that there is a bacteria called Helicobacter that actually can cause these stomach ulcers from forming. We used to think it was stress, and now we know that it is a special kind of bacteria that is the culprit of most ulcers. So the small intestine, guys, is where 90% of the absorption occurs. The small intestine has 3 parts. The duodenum, which this would be the stomach right here. So the duodenum is the first part, and then the jejunum is the second part, and that's the most of what the small intestine is. And then the last part of the small intestine is called the ileum. And the ileum, you can see, is going to flow into the large intestine right there. So because we need a lot of absorption, the small intestine is very long. It has lots of folds. It has very tiny little folds in the actual cells called villi, and it actually has little microvilli on the absorption on the cells itself to absorb. And you can see when you look inside the small intestine, there's lots and lots of folds, and this is more membrane means more absorption. There's a lot of diffusion that occurs, and the more membrane we have, the more diffusion that we have, and so that's why our small intestine is so large. So the small intestine is called small because of the diameter, but it is actually longer than the large intestine. So here we have the duodenum. The duodenum is the section closest to the stomach. It's about 25 centimeters long, and this is called the mixing bowl because now the material from the stomach is not a bolus anymore. Now we call this chyme. So it's partially digested, it's acidic, and it comes in from the stomach. And the duodenum is called the mixing bowl because it's going to receive chyme from the stomach, and it is going to receive digestive enzymes from the pancreas, and it's going to get bile via the gallbladder from the liver. So here are all the things that happen in the duodenum. So here's the duodenum. All right, I'm going to switch to red here. I think you can see that better. So so here comes my acid chyme. Chyme is what we call the acid material now coming out of the stomach. So the pH is very, very low. It's very acidic coming into here. So there's a couple of different things that happen in our mixing bowl. This is what we call the duodenum, our mixing bowl. So the first thing that happens, bile that is produced in the liver that is stored in the gallbladder is going to go into the duodenum, and bile helps to break down fat, helps to emulsify fat. The other thing that happens is we get pancreatic juices from the pancreas. And these are juices that help to neutralize, the acid that is coming in from the acidic chyme. And that's a very important thing. There's also some other secretions in the pancreatic juices, some enzymes and things, but those are the main things that happen in the duodenum. So the liver itself, remember, is an accessory organ. The liver does a bunch of different things. It detoxifies. It is going to be important for producing bile. It is a bunch of, I call it the biochemistry carnival, because there are so many chemical reactions that occur in our liver. This is where we help to regulate our blood glucose. And so there's a lot of different things that happen in the liver. So one of the things that is important about the liver, the word hepatic means liver, is that it detoxifies materials that are coming from the intestine. And so all the food that is, all the nutrients, that are absorbed from the digestive system, from the GI tract, digestive system, are going to, before they get circulated into the whole body, they actually are shunted to the liver. So this is digestive system absorbance. So these are amino acids and other things that come in from the small intestine. So before they go throughout the whole body, they go to the liver first through a very important blood vessel called the hepatic portal vein. And so all this stuff that has been absorbed in the small intestine goes to the liver, and the liver gets the first shot at detoxifying those things before they are then circulated throughout the whole body. So here we got the three main functions of the liver. We have some nutrient metabolism. So this is the biochemistry carnival we talked about. Lots of different chemical reactions that occur here. We have some vitamin storage here. Toxins removed, drug interactions occur here. And one of the things that we're going to talk about later is alcohol. So alcohol, and I'm talking about the alcohol that is in ethanol, that is in alcoholic drinks, is actually a poison. And the liver's job is to take care of this. And if you abuse alcohol, one of the things that is going to happen that's detrimental to your body is that you can get disease called cirrhosis of the liver, which is just too much alcohol being processed by that liver. The liver also removes old blood vessels. It makes some blood cells. It makes some plasma proteins, and it also produces bile to help digest fats. The gallbladder is a pear-shaped muscular sac that stores bile. And you can see that the bile is produced in the liver, and it is stored and concentrated here in the gallbladder. And then when it needs to be released into the duodenum, remember this is the duodenum, then the gallbladder is going to secrete that through the common bile duct, and it goes into the small intestine right there. And sometimes you can get some hard deposits in the gallbladder called gallstones, and they are sometimes they get large enough that they actually have to be surgically removed, and your gallbladder can be removed, and you can live without a gallbladder. Your liver and other parts of your body will compensate. So the pancreas is a really important organ that lies just below the stomach, and the pancreas is like two organs in one. So part of what the pancreas does is it produces two very important hormones called insulin and glucagon that help to control blood glucose. So this is our blood sugar, and that is being controlled by insulin and glucagon that is actually made in the pancreas. So that part of the pancreas is what we call an endocrine function. The other part of the pancreas is an exocrine function. Exocrine means that the materials are secreted in a duct straight into some other vessel. endocrine means that the materials are going into the bloodstream. So the exocrine function of the pancreas is that it produces some pancreatic juices, and we talked before that these are alkaline. Alkaline means that it's going to help to neutralize the acids, and there are some other digestive enzymes that come through this little duct right here, and they go straight into the duodenum. Here's our mixing bowl, our duodenum. And so that's why they're called exocrine, because it's going straight into another area. The endocrine is going to go into the blood first. So this is part 1 of the digestive system, and I did make a part 2, and stay tuned for that.